So it's good to be together this morning. We're going to continue in our series called Fishing Trips, so the premise is that Jesus calls his disciples. He tells them, you're not catching any fish, try the other side of the boat. So he teaches them how to fish for fish, even though they're professionals. And then he says, is this really satisfying you? Don't you want to do more? Come follow me, and I'll teach you how to be fishers of men. And so they do, and they record their stories, and so we get to follow them. And so that's what we're doing in this series. We're just following some of these stories, so just watching as Jesus shares the gospel in his context and learning how to share the gospel in ours. And so I'm going to read our scripture passage this morning. It's going to be in Mark chapter 1, starting in verse 35. The story that I'm about to tell is remarkable, I think, for a few reasons. So this is an absolutely explosive moment in Jesus' ministry. Like this is a turning point in his ministry. He's been going around. I'll just open it up. So he gets done with the last story, where's the line that I want? There's one cool line. I might be losing it. I half remember something. So it says that Jesus is going from town to town, and he says so let's go on to the next town and I'll preach. Okay, here we go. Let us go on to the next towns that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out. And so he went throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. Text says Jesus came out into this region because he's going to go from town to town and preach the gospel. That's his purpose in what he's doing right now. That's what he says. He says, that's why I came out. So this story that I'm about to tell is a place where he goes from going from town to town he actually can't get into towns because he's just overrun by the number of people. By the end of this next story, he goes out to a desolate place where nobody else is, and people are coming to him from every quarter. It changes Jesus's mission. It changes the way that he's tackling sharing the gospel here. This story does, which is remarkable, and I think you'll see why when I read it. So I'm in chapter 1, verse 40 of Mark, and it says, "And a leper came to him, to Jesus, imploring him, and kneeling said to him, 'If you will, you can make me clean.' Moved by pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will. Be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and said to him, and sent him away at once and said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone. See that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them.' But when the man left, he went out and he began to talk freely about it and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in desolate places, and people were coming to him from every corner." That's kind of wild, isn't it? That's kind of wild. You can see why. So, if nothing else, Jesus directly told the guy, "Here, I've healed you, but you can't tell anybody about it." And so, of course, the guy did. He tells everybody. And there are reasons for that. And some of the reasons, actually, I just don't quite understand. Like, Jesus says some things about how his time has not yet come when he tells people to be silent, and things that, I don't know, you need a better theologian, a scholar than I am to understand those things, I think. But I understand part of it, I think. Jesus wasn't handing out healings because he wanted to make himself more popular. He wasn't trying to establish he wasn't trying to establish a fan club. So Jesus he wasn't encouraging people to get the word out. This wasn't an advertisement for Jesus. Hold on to that notion, because I think that this is key to understanding the gospel. Jesus always moves for the personal over the popular. Jesus told the leper not to tell anybody, And the leper tells anyone who will listen, and the result, Jesus couldn't show up in a town without being overwhelmed. And so he had to do ministry from the desolate places. Desolate. Desolate kind of carries a connotation of being bleak and barren and dismal, but it doesn't really mean that. It just means places of thorough solitude. Jesus went out to the places where he was absolutely alone, and people found him because people were eager for what he had. It says that people were coming to him from every quarter. Even when it's just one man who is desperately sick, ordered to silence. Even when Jesus is in a place where nobody else is, he's thoroughly alone. The gospel of Jesus Christ, the good news of Jesus Christ, has a life of its own. It cannot be contained. That's another thing that I think is critical that we understand about the gospel. So a fair question of this passage is, what gospel? What gospel does Jesus share with this man? I think this is my favorite part of this passage. The fascinating thing about this story to me is that Jesus appears to be fishing without a hook. He never tells the man that he needs to repent of his sins to be forgiven. He never tells him, I'm going to heal you, but I have something more to offer you. We see Jesus do that in other places, right? I'll give you what you're asking for, but I have more to offer you. He doesn't tell him, if you first believe, then you'll be healed. He doesn't make it a condition of his faith here. I think his faith is apparent here, but Jesus doesn't make that a condition of his faith here. This is a weird way of Jesus sharing the gospel, right? The words that Jesus says when he's sharing the gospel in this passage is, I will be clean. I will be clean. Jesus saw a man that was sick and untouchable, and he touched him, and he said, be clean, and the man was clean. That's the transmission of the gospel in this passage. That's the third thing I want us to understand about the gospel in this passage. I have more to say about this passage, but first, so I've been fishing with my dad a lot. My dad's kind of a professional fisherman, runs a charter service, and so I've picked up a few things about fishing. One of the things I picked up about fishing is that some people don't have to be good at it; they're just lucky. There's some people that fishing just comes naturally for, and wherever they cast out their line, whatever side of the boat they're on, whatever they put on the end of it, they're going to catch fish, and they're going to catch more fish than me, and they're going to catch bigger fish than me. And one of them's my sister, so my sister's the luckiest fisherman that I know, and it just doesn't matter what she does. She always outfishes me. I'm not bitter about it or anything. It's just the way it is. But she's not better than me. I know. I'm a better fisherman than she is. I've put in more effort. I understand what we're doing. I'm fairly independent. She's not independent. But she still catches more fish than me. But looking back at growing up, I think I start to realize that my sister would have never had the opportunity to be the luckiest fisherman that I know if my dad hadn't parked the boat in the right place. My dad parks the boat. My dad puts the worm on her line, whatever. I think she might do that now. I'm not sure. If my dad hadn't been the one driving the boat, then my sister wouldn't have been the luckiest fisherman that I know. She would have been just as lucky as I am. I know quite a bit about fishing, but not only because my dad taught me all these things. So my dad has put in an absurd amount of time and an absurd amount of effort learning the ins and the outs and the secrets of the trade. He knows how fish work, and he knows how the boat works, and he knows what lures and what equipment's going to be effective. He knows fishing, and this is important. If we're going to bring the gospel to the world, then we need to know the gospel. We need to understand it, and we need to keep understanding it better and better. We need to understand how it works, and we need to, and I think that this passage, I think that this story with the leper shows the gospel in a light that we don't see it very often. I think it tells us things about the gospel that we need to take note of. First, that Jesus always moves for the personal over the popular. Like, that's our gospel. Jesus sees people. Jesus is moved by personal needs and concerns. He isn't trying to get people on his side. He isn't trying to be well liked. There's a story in Luke chapter 15 that says that there's more rejoicing over one sinner. Oh, I bookmarked it. I'll just open it. Jesus is telling a story about a sheep that's lost. So he has 99 sheep that aren't lost. He has one sheep that's lost, and he says, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 persons who need no repentance. Jesus is telling us that, the reason for that is because he knows that person by name. He cares about that as not as a soul on a tally board that he's keeping track of and saying, "Oh, we're getting up to capacity. We're going to be full soon." Like, he knows that person by name. Pastor Tim was telling me after the first service this is a set of 3 stories, right? So the second story, Jesus doesn't tell 3 stories unless he doesn't think they're quite getting it the first time, and so he tells them a little bit more detail. He says, just so, tells a story about a guy who lost a coin. He says, "Just so, I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Joy before the angels of God, right? So he's not saying the angels of God are joyful. He's saying that in their presence, there is one who is full of joy. Who's in the presence of the angels of God right now? No one but the Father himself. The Father is overflowing with joy, and the angels are just watching the Father dance a jig because of one sinner repenting. And he says, if you don't get it yet, let me tell you a story about a father who loses a son. He says, "It was fitting to celebrate and be glad because your brother was dead and is alive, is lost and is found." Jesus is saying there's as much joy in heaven over one person who comes back to the Father as there is for any father who has lost a child to death and seen that child come back to life. Because Jesus knows us by name. I actually think that, I think that God is, I think Jesus is a little bit like Buddy the Elf, from the movie Elf. So I think so you remember that scene, right? Where he's in the department store, somebody mentions that Santa's coming, and Buddy says, "Santa, he's coming? I know him." I think that's how it was. Pastor Tim, when you came into the kingdom, I think that Jesus turned to the angels and said, "Tim, he's coming? I know him. He's a friend of mine. I have to get a place ready for him. I'm going to prepare. I'm going to clean a room out. I've got to build a place for him." I think that's the joy of the Father, because he knows us. For God, it's personal. In heaven, everyone has a name. I think that this was one of the more striking parts of this story is that the man said to Jesus. So the leper said to Jesus, "If you will it, you can make me clean." And the text said that Jesus was moved with pity. I think pity is one of those words that gets a bad rap because maybe we use it wrong. Pity shouldn't be condescending, but pity's a beautiful emotion when it's done right. Pity has the uncanny ability to see people who are in a bad place. To see people who are in a bad place because maybe their health is bad, or maybe their finances are tanked, or they have a bad job, or bad relationship, bad friendships in the wrong crowd, bad circles dragging them down. Maybe they just make bad decisions. Pity has the capacity to see past all of that bad and to see that underneath it all there's a person who's in pain. That's the nature of pity. Jesus is moved by pity, and he saw underneath the spots there was a person in pain. And he didn't see the leper as a leper. He saw him as a person who'd been cut off from his society, from his family and friends, and cast away, and he loved him. And he hated the pain that he felt. And he did something about it. For Jesus, it was personal. And then there's the second thing. God moved, and he specifically told the guy, don't tell anybody what I did for you here. This is between us. But the man told everybody, and it exploded. And so what are we to think? Is the message here that the man was ungrateful, that the man was disobedient? And maybe. I don't think so. I think it's more likely that, I don't think that this man telling people took Jesus by surprise. I think that it's more likely that the man was just so excited that he couldn't contain himself. Jesus just gave his life back. And so I think that he looked down at his skin and saw that he was whole, and he was marching off to the officials to prove himself, to offer the offerings that Moses had commanded. And I think that on his way, he was thinking, God told me not to tell anybody. I can probably manage that. And I think that somebody asked him, how are you well? That doesn't just happen. What happened? And he said, well, I'm not supposed to tell anybody about it, but I met this guy, and I saw what he was doing for everyone else, and I said, well, why not me? He did it for everyone else. He can. The only question is whether or not he's willing. So I'll just ask him. So he had the courage to say, I've seen what you could do. Will you? And she said, I will. And so he tells everybody, it burst out of him. Jesus moved in his life, and it burst out of him. Because that's what the gospel does. When Jesus changes us, even if we're trying to hold it in, the gospel finds a way out. That's the nature of the good news. It isn't about mustering up more courage to share Jesus. Maybe it's about mustering up the courage to say, if you will, make me clean. Maybe it's about mustering up the courage to say, Jesus, I need you. I need to experience the kind of things that you can do for everyone else. I've seen you doing them for everyone else. I've heard the stories. Why not me? If you will, you can make me clean. And then third, we have to ask what the gospel is. We need to keep asking, what is the good news of Jesus Christ? Did Jesus fail to share it here, maybe? Because otherwise, we have to reevaluate what we understand about the gospel. Jesus didn't use the words we expect him to use here. Jesus didn't tell him what he told Nicodemus. He didn't say, you can be born again. He didn't say you can be saved from your sins. He didn't say anything about you have to believe in me to have eternal life. If you profess with your mouth, believe in your heart that I'm Lord. He didn't say any of the things that were he didn't say any of the things that are in our little booklets. I think that this is important. I think Christians can. I think that we can be distracted from the gospel, even by our own methods of sharing the gospel. Actually, that's why I really like this 15-second testimony thing, because this 15-second testimony isn't a dry tool where we use all the same words as we've always used because they're supposed to work, even though they don't. It's about sharing the gospel. The gospel is, what was your encounter with Jesus? What did it look like when you met him? Because this leper met Jesus, and it changed his life. And this leper went and told people, even though he wasn't supposed to, about the time that he met Jesus and the way that it changed his life. And people came from every quarter to find Jesus in the desolate places because they'd heard that he does incredible things. That's how we share the gospel. We see Jesus doing incredible things, and we tell people about it. Friends, our words matter. People aren't saved without words. Words carry the gospel. There might be exceptions to that. You can fight me over it if you want to, but words carry the gospel. But the path to sharing our faith doesn't come from clever words or tried and true patterns. They don't come from tools. It's about reflecting on our story and understanding what it is that God has given us. Why am I a Christian, and what does that mean to me? And if you don't have a story like that, you can. Because he's doing it for everybody else. Why not you? One of my dad's sayings when we're out on the boat is you can't catch fish if you don't have any lines in the water. Our stories are our lines. Our stories, our experiences of Jesus, our encounters with the gospel, with the good news, those are the things that connect people to the Father. Those are our lines. They aren't the gospel themselves, but they're what connects us to the gospel. And so if you aren't intimate with Jesus, if you aren't growing with Jesus, then you aren't experiencing the good news of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. 2 Peter 1 says it like this. Peter says, this is starting in verse 3, he says, his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through knowledge of him who has called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. And then he says, for this very reason, because he's given you everything that you need, for this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to your goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness brotherly affection, and to brotherly affection love. For if you possess these qualities, if you possess knowledge and self-control and perseverance and godliness and mutual affection, if you possess love, then that'll keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of Jesus Christ. That's what it says. That's the promise. If you possess love, which is the culmination of all the rest of these gifts, if you possess love, it will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ. But whoever does not have these things is nearsighted and blind, forgetting that they have been cleansed from their past sins. Is this the truth? If you're adding to your faith goodness knowledge, so and so, if you're growing in love, then those things are going to keep you from being ineffective and unfruitful. But if you aren't growing in those things, then you're so nearsighted that you're blind. So nearsighted, you only see the things that are right in front of your face. So like if I'm farsighted, then I can only see far away and I can't see close up. But if I'm nearsighted, I can only see what's right here. You're so nearsighted that you're blind. When you're nearsighted, all you see are the leper's spots and the dangers that he poses to you. When you're nearsighted, you see the leper as an object that's potentially threatening to you. When you're nearsighted, all you can see is the leper's spots, and you forget that you were cleansed from your former sins. You forget that you were just like him. Jesus saw the leper as a person with needs basically the same as anyone else's. It's the gospel. The gospel is making a new path in our lives. We see the leper as a person with needs basically the same as our own. Like his circumstances might be different, but he needs people. He needs friends. He needs connections. He needs community, and he needs food, and he needs alleviation from his financial concerns, and he needs Jesus. When we see a person then we see that their needs are about the same as our own, even when their circumstances are different. This is the quest. This is what it means to share the gospel. So I'll tell you a quick story. So I guess it's not that quick, but it's a good story. So I was in the UK for about 8 months, and so I spent a week of that time in the middle of it all. I went to London to visit, and so I ended up. All of the subways were shut down because of a strike, and I ended up in the middle of London, stranded. With I don't know how to get. I'm not that good at cities. So like London was the first city I ever did, and I was stranded in the middle of the night. It was midnight, and I thought the subways were going to be open because that's the only way I knew how to get home. They weren't, and so I was wandering around. I found a bus, and so I found a bus that was going to go back to the place where I was staying. The only problem was that it was a night bus, and so it didn't run until 1:30, so I sat outside of a Five Guys till 1:30 in the middle of London and waited. And so, like, all that's to say, I was tired and I was beat and I was frustrated. It was a long day, and I got on the bus and we made it one stop, and that one stop we were there, and we were there, and we were there, and like something was going wrong, and we were there for 15 or 20 minutes, and so we finally move again, and this guy wanders up the stairs because this bus had 2 levels. And so he wanders up the stairs, and he has a brown paper bag in his hand, and he's obviously pretty plastered, and the reason that we were there for 15 or 20 minutes. So everybody on the bus was frustrated with this guy. And so he was standing up on the front of the bus chatting, and he sloshed his beer over on some guy, and he was a pretty big guy, and he wasn't very happy, and he politely suggested that he find a seat, or else he was going to go through a window. And so he found a seat. He sat next to another guy who was sitting alone and chatted with him for about 3 minutes, and then got kicked out and bounced around the bus. I'm just dreading the moment when he comes to my seat because he's trying everybody else's. And I just wasn't ready for it. I wasn't dealing with it. And so he made his way to my seat. And so I just asked him, how's your day been? That's all I said. I said, how's your day been? I wanted to know the answer. And he told me the answer, and it was a lot. Like, he'd just been fired from his job. He was working hard and working a lot of hours because he was trying to save up enough money to get back to Poland because his dad was in Poland dying of cancer. He'd just gotten fired, so he decided, take my last paycheck, and I'm just going to hit up the bars tonight because I'm not making enough money anyway, and at least I've got something. And he cried, and he cried on my shoulder. He missed his stop 20 minutes before he realized it. And I shared the gospel with him. I think I shared the gospel with him when I asked him how his day was and cared about the answer. But I told him, I'm here because I'm here interning in some churches, and I know Jesus, and I think you should too. He works in situations like this. I've seen him do it before. And the guy was receptive and listened to me, and I prayed with him. And I think that people know when we see them. I think that people respond when we see them. When we ask them a question and care about the answer. When we're moved by pity. I think we need to allow ourselves to be moved by pity more. There's a way to be moved by pity without making people feel pitiful, because Jesus did it. Jesus lifted people up. Jesus gave people strength. In the first century, people were diagnosed with leprosy, and they were cast out and kept segregated from society. They were, through no fault of their own, isolated and lonely and hopeless and ignored and untouchable. That was the word, right? Untouchable. We minister to the untouchables by touching them on the arm and saying, just letting them know that we're willing. letting them know that we're willing to have them brought into our circles, to bring them into our circles, to go into their circles, to be willing to go into their lives and to share our spheres with them, to share space with them, to make space for them, and let them know that we're willing to cross cultural boundaries because we want to be with them. And we need to be the people that notice when no one else does. That's what it means to be a Christian, friends. We're the people that notice. Do you know what the most frustrating part of fishing with my dad is? I don't think he's this bad on charters, I promise. You guys could go ahead and fish with him and not worry about all these negative things. But for me, so he has this really nice, expensive fish finder. And so it shoots sonar down to the bottom, and it shows him where all the fish are. And so he's glued to it, man, and he's watching, and it'll tell him if they're fish when he's going full speed ahead. He'll mark them, and if it's not working right, then he'll slow down, and he'll stop way before we get to the place to our fishing hole. He'll stop around the edges, and he'll look, and when he starts seeing marks, he says, well, his line is, well, we might as well give it a try, right? And so we do. We get all the lines out. It's terribly frustrating because I just want to go where I know that there are fish because we just fished there. I know there are fish, and sometimes it's just for a few minutes. Like we try it, nothing happens, we move on. But other times we learn completely new ways to fish because he stopped and tried something new because he was fishing out of the edges because my dad never lets getting where we're going be so precious that he misses why we're going. Jesus never lets getting where he's going be so precious that he misses why he's going. Jesus was headed to where the people were. Jesus was heading to where he knew the fish were. Jesus was going from town to town and preaching the gospel and casting out demons. That was his plan, I know, because he just said so. But a guy stopped him and said, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus is stopping for that. That's our gospel mentality. That's what it is for Jesus. There are people that no one else is going to share the gospel with because nobody else sees them, because everybody else walks right by them. People don't notice. Our place as followers of Jesus Christ is to slow down if we need to. It's to see the people that haven't been seen. It's to notice. We need to notice people more. We need to be moved by pity. I think the secret to that, I think the key to that is cultivating humility. We experience the gospel. We enter into a story and a kingdom that's bigger than us, and then we find our role in it. When we experience Jesus touching and forming and changing the parts of our lives that we felt were untouchable, that we felt like nobody could see because we had them all covered up, then we can share the gospel lightly and freely, because we can trust that our joy and our relief and our urgency are going to carry through. We can trust that our love is going to carry through. When we are really experiencing the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, we learn to really trust it. We learn to really trust that this news that we have really is good because we've tasted and we've seen. And so that's our prayer. Like that's what we need. If we're going to be couriers of the gospel of Jesus Christ, if we're going to make a difference in people's lives, then I need you to stop on the margins, fish around the edges, and pay attention to the people who are overlooked. And that begins by allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by the gospel, by inviting the gospel into us, by inviting Jesus to make differences in our lives. It begins by no longer seeing ourselves as the hero of the story, and those people on the margin as people that we're giving the gift of our attention. Like, they're not charity cases. It's our duty and our honor to share the gospel with them and to participate in their stories. Like, that, I think, is the mentality. I think that that's the shift. I think that that's it. We need to stop seeing people as a mission field per se, and consider the honor that we have of being participants in their story, and to share with them the story that's made all the difference in our lives. It's a privilege to be able to participate in people's stories. When I sat on that bus and let that guy's tears soak into my shirt, I was being privileged there, as I got to experience a part of his story that maybe he hadn't shared with anybody else. And I got to share with him the story that's most dear to me, that maybe nobody else could have ever shared with him. We're giving people their due, because our King, our Father, has asked us to deliver a gift. And it's not a gift from us. We're couriers. We're just delivering it. And so we need to do the people on the margins of our society and our lives the dignity of seeing them as people. And that begins with seeing what Jesus did for us while we were yet unclean.